I'm going to create another image that will become a piece of music. I have a blank canvas and I've added some lines that will be the staff for our music. That way it will give us an indication of the pitch of each note. When a note is high on the staff, it has a high pitch, and when it is low on the staff, it has a low pitch. I began with jagged lines and then began to turn them into trees. This piece is titled Chloe. The series originally began as portraiture, but then it started to move away from that starting point. They became less figurative, but they still have aspects that represent parts of the person. I chose a forest to represent the person's energy because it is something that is constantly growing and evolving. When I moved away from depictions of the figure, it made the representations of each person something that was more subtle. The changes I'm going to make now aren't part of the final image. We are going to turn this piece of artwork into sheet music, and to do so we need to create some notes. We already have horizontal lines that can be viewed as the staff on a piece of sheet music. The edge of each tree trunk can tell us where to place those notes. I've followed the edge of those shapes and I've placed red circles across the image. The image is already beginning to look like sheet music. The image doesn't tell me where to place the circles, and there are different options. Creating pieces like this gives space for improvisation, therefore it doesn't give you all the information that sheet music provides. That space gives you a place to make your own creative decisions. So how do we choose where to place our circles when we know they are going to be musical notes? I've created this staff and I've added some hills that are roughly the same shape and size. I've done this so you can get a clear sense of what happens when you put your circles or notes in different places. If a note is high on the staff, it has a high pitch, and if it is low on the staff, it has a low pitch. The peak of the hill is high and the bottom is low, so let's add some circles. In this image, I've put all the circles really close together. Each one is just a step away from the other. Let's use the image to tell us where to put the notes in our sheet music. The hills might not seem as obvious, but they are there. You can see how the shape of the notes leads to the three peaks. This is what happens when we put the circles very close together. Let's listen to what it sounds like. This is the same set of hills, but this time I've placed the circles further away from each other. They are a leap away from each other. Let's use this image to put the notes on a piece of sheet music. Let's use this image to tell us where to put the notes in our sheet music. You can see those three hills clearly. When we placed the notes together, there was a lot of notes and the hills almost seemed to be stretched out, even though we could still see them. But here we can see the hills clearly. It's easier to see the relationship between the two images. Let's hear how it sounds. When the circles are close together, the change of pitch is gradual. When the circles are further apart, the change of pitch is more drastic. One isn't better than the other, but there is definitely a difference. A piece of music that was created solely by notes a step away from each other would be dull, and a piece of music that was constantly leaping from note to note could also seem uninteresting. So what's the difference when we have a combination of steps and leaps? This time I've placed the circles so some are close together and some are further apart. This is a combination of notes that are a leap in pitch and notes that are a small step from one another. We can still see the shape of those hills. We haven't drawn the line, but we can still see its shape. Circles that are close together create little variation in pitch, and circles that are far apart have more variation. Listen to the change. That variation is the beginning of a melody, but that isn't everything we need to create a melody. Variation in pitch, the vertical distance between the notes is important, but we also want variation horizontally. We want to change the length of each note so some last longer and some are shorter, and there is spaces where there is a pause. I've took the same notes and I've added those variations. Once it has those variations, it becomes a melody. It now sounds like this. Because the variation makes the melody interesting, I knew that when I placed the circles on this image, it was better to add a combination of circles that are close together and circles that are a leap away from each other. I know the variation will make the melody more interesting. I've placed the notes in the positions indicated by this piece of artwork. At this stage, the notes are all the same length. You can tell because the symbol for that note is exactly the same across the entire piece of sheet music. Let's have a listen to how it sounds. There is variation in pitch. In some places there is a leap from one pitch to another, and sometimes it's just a step. Although the melody needs more variation when it comes to the length of each note. You can see that there are changes in the symbols used for each note. For example, some of the notes are hollow. They don't have a solid black circle. This symbol indicates that it's a longer note than the ones that have a solid black circle. Let's have a listen. I then made some changes and added chords. Let's hear how it sounds. Then I added a bass line. Let's hear how it sounds. I then continued with this piece as a starting point and created a larger piece of music. Let's listen to the finished track in Ableton Live.